Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something really powerful in American government, but maybe a bit overlooked. Congressional committees.
That's right. Everyone hears Congress holds the purse strings.
Yeah, exactly. But where is that power, really? Like, which specific rooms on Capitol Hill are making decisions that affect all of us?
That's the mission today, isn't it?
It is. We want to figure out which committee in Congress actually holds the most power.
It's a great question because, we see the big floor votes, the debates on TV.
Right.
But the real nitty-gritty, the shaping of the laws, the compromises that often happens earlier in these smaller groups, it's really where the legislative sausage gets made, so to speak.
Okay, so smaller groups. Let's start there. What exactly is a congressional committee? Why are they so essential?
Well, think of Congress, the whole House and Senate, as this huge organization. Hundreds of people.
Way too many to have everyone weigh in on every single detail.
Exactly. You wouldn't run a big company like that. You'd have departments, right? Specialized teams.
Okay.
Committees are basically that for Congress. Smaller groups in both the House and the Senate, and they're each tasked with specific jobs.
Like what kind of jobs?
Things like reviewing bills that get proposed, holding hearings to gather information, overseeing federal agencies to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to.
So it's about efficiency, dividing the workload, and maybe expertise too.
Precisely. It divides up this massive amount of work, and critically, it lets members really focus and develop expertise in certain areas like agriculture or finance or foreign policy.
That makes sense.
And there are different kinds of committees, standing, select, joint, conference. It can get a bit complex. But for figuring out where the real sustained power lies, we're going to focus mainly on the standing committees today.
Why standing committees specifically?
Because they're permanent. They don't just pop up for one issue and then disappear like a select committee might. This permanence lets them build up expertise over years, even decades. They develop institutional memory, relationships, and all that translates directly into serious legislative influence.
So it's not just their official job description, it's also that history, that accumulated knowledge, the connections people build over time.
Absolutely. That's a huge part of their power.
Interesting. But does that concentration of power, in these smaller groups ever become a problem? Like, does the rest of Congress lose track or too much influence gets bottled up?
Oh, it definitely can. And that concentration of power is exactly why we're doing this deep dive.
Right.
Which brings us back to the main event. Which of these standing committees really sits at the top?
Okay, lay it on us. Who are the heavyweights?
Well, while lots of committees have clout, 3 consistently bubble up when you talk about sheer power and impact.
And they are?
The House Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, and then the House and Senate Appropriations Committees.
Okay, a lot of finance and money in those names. Let's start with Ways and Means, House Ways and Means.
Right. This one is one of the oldest committees and genuinely one of the most powerful in the House, possibly the most.
And what's its domain?
Its core job is handling taxation, tariffs, and basically all measures that raise revenue for the government.
So if it's about how the government earns its money...
It starts in Ways and Means. Think about that. They control the input side of the ledger. How big the government's budget can even be is fundamentally shaped by their decisions on taxes and revenue.
That's enormous influence right there, deciding how much money the government even has to work with. Can you give an example of how that power plays out, maybe beyond just setting tax rates?
Sure. Think about tax policy not just as raising money, but as shaping behavior. Ways and Means can create tax breaks to encourage certain industries, right? Or use tariffs to protect others.
So they're kind of steering the economy indirectly.
Exactly. They can subtly pick winners and losers, or find ways to fund new programs by tweaking the tax code in ways most people don't even notice. That's a profound level of influence.
Okay, and its counterpart in the Senate is the Finance Committee.
Yes, the Senate Finance Committee.
Yeah.
It's the Senate's equivalent, handling tax policy, trade agreements, but also big things like healthcare funding, Medicare, Medicaid. Broadly, you could say all things fiscal in the Senate fall under its umbrella.
So Ways and Means and Finance are kind of a pair dealing with the money coming in.
Largely, yes. They work together often, especially on big tax bills or trade deals.
But then you mentioned the appropriations committees. Both House and Senate have one. How do they fit in if Ways and Means decides how big the pie is?
Right. This is the other side of the coin, and it's crucial. Ways and Means and Finance figure out the size of the pie, how much money the government collects.
Okay.
Appropriations decides how that pie gets sliced up. They decide where the money actually goes.
So they control the spending.
Exactly. This is what people often mean by the power of the purse. It's a fundamental constitutional power of Congress, and it's wielded by the appropriations committees.
Let me make sure I've got this straight. Ways and means, government income, appropriations, government spending.
That's a perfect way to put it. Think about your household budget analogy again. Ways and means is your salary. Appropriations is deciding how much goes to rent, groceries, the car payment, everything else.
And what kind of spending are we talking about?
Pretty much everything. Defense budgets, education funding, money for roads and bridges, healthcare programs, scientific research, you name it. If the federal government spends money on it, appropriations had a say.
Wow, and they can increase or cut funding?
Oh, yeah. They can give an agency a huge boost, or they can slash its budget dramatically. Federal agencies, I mean, they really live or die based on the decisions made in appropriations.
That sounds like immense political leverage.
It is. Absolutely immense. Think about it.
Yep.
If you're a member of Congress and you want funding for a project back in your district, a new highway, a hospital wing, whatever.
You need to talk to someone on appropriations.
You definitely do. Members on these committees hold significant sway. Other lawmakers are constantly coming to them looking for help, making deals.
So these committees are like breeding grounds for political deal-making and influence.
That's a very good way to put it. It can make the process less transparent sometimes because a lot of these critical decisions about funding get hammered out in negotiations within the committee, maybe not always in the full public glare.
Which is why understanding them is important for citizens, right? Because it's not always obvious where these funding decisions originate.
Precisely. If you follow politics, you often hear about the appropriations chair or maybe small groups of appropriators negotiating behind closed doors. That's this power in action.
So if I just got elected to Congress, trying to get a seat on Ways and Means or appropriations would be like top priority. Sounds like the fast track to influence.
It's certainly where a lot of the legislative action happens, yes. It's definitely seen as a power committee assignment. But, money isn't the only form of power in Congress.
Right. What about committees that control, say, the process or the rules?
Good point. That brings us to other key players. The House Rules Committee, for example.
The traffic cop of the House, I've heard it called.
Exactly. It doesn't handle money directly, but it controls the flow of legislation to the House floor. They decide which bills get debated when and under what rules, like how long debate can last or what amendments are allowed.
So they could just stop a bill from ever getting a vote.
They absolutely can. They can effectively kill legislation by simply not granting it a rule to proceed to the floor. That's a massive procedural power, a gatekeeping function.
Yeah, okay, that's definitely power. And what about the Senate Judiciary Committee? That one gets a lot of attention.
Immensely influential, yes, but in a different way. Their biggest impact comes through the confirmation process for federal judges.
Including Supreme Court justices.
Especially Supreme Court justices. Their hearings, their recommendations, their votes on nominees shape the federal judiciary and therefore the interpretation of laws for decades. It's a long-term foundational kind of power.
So we have these other powerful committees, rules controlling procedure, judiciary shaping the courts. But if we circle back to that idea of raw, day-to-day power over the government's direction and priorities.
Then yes, I think you still have to come back to those financial committees, the House Ways and Means Committee and the House and Senate Appropriations Committees.
They hold the crown.
In terms of directly controlling the government's financial resources, which dictates what it can and cannot do on a massive scale, yes. They generally hold the crown for that kind of operational priority-setting power.
Okay, so let's connect this back to the listener. Why should, the average person care deeply about which committee does what?
Because these decisions directly impact your life in countless ways. It's about how your tax dollars are spent.
Right.
It affects your healthcare funding levels for Medicare, Medicaid, medical research. It affects job opportunities, money for infrastructure projects, support for certain industries. It affects education, safety, the environment.
So if I'm wondering why, say, my state didn't get funding for that new bridge,
the answer probably lies somewhere in the appropriations process. Maybe a decision made deep within the committee.
Or if my taxes changed last year.
That likely traces back to Ways and Means or Senate Finance. These committees, as we said, often work away from the big headlines.
Behind closed doors, sometimes.
Sometimes, yes. So understanding their role is really, really crucial if you want to be an informed citizen and understand how Washington actually works. beyond just the surface level.
You really have to look into those committee rooms.
You do.
Okay, so to wrap this up and definitively answer our question for this deep dive, which committees hold the most power?
Based on their control over the government's finances, both raising revenue and deciding spending, you'd have to say the House Ways and Means Committee and the House and Senate Appropriations Committees are arguably the most powerful day-to-day players in Congress.
Their financial control is just so comprehensive.
It touches everything.
But maybe a final thought here. Power in Congress isn't just about the committee assignments or the formal rules, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. That's a critical point. It's also deeply about relationships, about timing, about negotiation skills, personality, political wins.
It's a whole complex game.
It really is.
Yeah?
It's a game played by masters of leverage. Knowing the rules of the committees is step one, but understanding the players and the dynamics is a whole other level.
So, something for all of you listening to think about next time you see a headline about Congress. Are you just seeing the final vote on the stage? Or are you thinking about the maneuvering that happened behind the curtain, probably in one of these powerful committees?
A great question to keep in mind.
Definitely something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.